I've been tangling with depression for the past decade. Well, realistically, longer than that. I remember being 15 years old, and my mindset when I was 15, I was in high school, probably my sophomore year, I think, or maybe my junior year. But my mindset was to finish out high school to make my mother happy, and then I was gonna end it. And I know that that might sound crazy. That's a crazy way to even open up a video, but I do like transparency. And the reason why I like transparency is because I just don't feel like there's a reason to hide yourself. You gotta live fully and as vibrantly as you can, and you have to be open and accountable with yourself. Now, the point of this video is because over the course of the past 10 years, in fact, I'm just coming off the heels of what I call a depressive slump. Like just coming off the heels of it, probably a week of just my mind being a little bit more clear and me being a little bit more active in my life because there gets to a point where I kind of shut down a little bit, and I, I don't know if people out there relate to what I'm talking about, but like I said, or like I always say, my big thing is just offering up a perspective. I use that word a lot. I love that word. In fact, I love perspectives. I love mine. I love other people's perspectives. I love sharing my stories as much as I love hearing other people's. So, what I want to do here today is, like I said, offer my perspective on a few things and also just maybe open up yours. So, those thoughts are going to get real, real heavy. Right now, we're in probably the most fear mongering state of the world, really. Yeah, because what's going on right now in America, that's where I'm at in America. It's terrifying, but the truth is, this doesn't just stop in America. It goes to the entire world. And when you're under constant fear and anxiety, and you're dealing with things like burnout, and you're dealing with things like creator's block, where if you're more of a creative type, you can't really get your outlet. You can't really output anything creatively. And you're dealing with financial stresses and relationship stresses and loneliness and addiction and all of these things. Your mind is going to get really heavy and it's going to go to a lot of dark places. And I'm not going to sit here. This is going to sound crazy, but I need you to really hold on for me, all right? I'm not going to sit here and tell you everything is going to be all right. And it's not because I don't believe that everything is going to be all right. It's not because that I'm saying that things are going to be bad. The point that I'm trying to get across is that a lot of times when you're in these depressive slumps, these episodes, that's the last thing that you really want to hear. It's nice to hear, what I'm saying, where, if you're lucky enough to be able to open up to somebody and talk to, a loved one or even like a therapist, someone that you got to pay or, whoever, and they listen to what's going on in your head. And the first thing I always tell you is everything's going to be okay. You're not alone. They tell you all these cliche things. And I'm not saying that these things are not true. Okay. In fact, I do actually want to say that, things are going to be fine and you really are not alone. But the reason why I'm not saying them here is because what's the point of regurgitating the same thing that you're going to hear a million times over? Because in that moment, even though it might help you, a lot of times it doesn't. In fact, sometimes it makes you feel even worse. I know for me personally, when I'm dealing with those type of things, hearing those things makes me, it don't make me feel worse. I can't sit here and lie to you, but it definitely doesn't make me feel better. It makes me feel a little bit indifferent, if anything, because a lot of the times people don't understand exactly what you're going through. They might get a general grip or a general concept of what you're feeling, but they'll never truly understand the inner workings of your mind. So for me, when I go into a depressive state, I'm getting better at excuse me. So when I go into a depressive state, the first thing I do is identify that I'm heading into a depressive state. My environment plays a huge part in my current state of mind. Me personally, I'm not a neat freak necessarily, but I shower every day and I clean up and I try to keep a clean apartment. I don't like having dishes in the sink and having an overflowing trash bin and having junk all over the countertops and the floor and laundry everywhere and all these things. But what happens is that for me, depression creeps. It creeps over time. I go through these points where I'm on top of the world and I'm just radiating with all this energy and these ideas. And over time, creeping in like a shadow, those depressive thoughts just build more and more and more. And, it starts with, a cup being left out. And instead of me immediately using it and then washing it, or at the very least putting it in the sink, I just leave it in its spot, which is on my little fixture. I don't really got a table, but I got a little fixture. I don't got room in my apartment for a table. But, it starts with that. Then next thing you know, there might be a wrapper on the floor. There might be a little bit more junk food involved. I'm a healthy person. I like to eat fruits and vegetables. My favorite snack is some diced up cucumbers that's seasoned up with a little bit of salt, some garlic, paprika, some oil and vinegar. Like that'll take me. That's all I need for real. Or I have an apple or a kiwi or some mangoes or something like that. Those are my snacks of choice. So when I'm eating stuff like potato chips or French fries or any sort of like garbage food, that's the depression creeping up on me, and I have to identify that. And when you identify it, then you got to look at what in your life is causing you to even have these depressive things creep up on you, to even have a space in your life, because life comes in cycles, right? And what's going to happen is you're going to have your high points, and then you're going to hit these depressive slumps, and you're going to hit some low points, and then it's going to spin right back around. So when I'm on high points, like I said, things are clean around me. I'm eating healthy. I'm working out regularly. I'm much more physically active. I'm much more willing to even just go out and be in the world and go do run some errands, or maybe go to the little corner store or something like that, or even just go outside for a walk and get some fresh air. But once I'm in a depressive slump, all of that stops. And my thoughts just start getting a lot heavier, because then it switches from my environment to what I'm consuming, and not just food, stuff like media, stuff like the music I listen to. I got whole, I guess, sad boy playlists, if you want to call them that or whatever, but I got songs that kind of like earworm for me. They pop back into my head. And there's songs that are a little bit more destructive for my mental health. They might not sound bad, what I'm saying? Like sonically, they sound great, but they're not good for me mentally. And I start consuming those more. Those songs start to pop in my head, so I start listening to them a little bit more. Next thing you know, I wake up, and because of the way that I'm thinking or feeling, I'll cancel any sort of obligations that I have. Like, one time, this was just a month or two ago, I called in from work. I was in a depressive slump. I called in for 3 days, and it's real. Like, I'm not gonna sit here and pretend like these things don't happen to me. One thing about me, I'm not gonna throw stones from a glass house. I'm gonna always speak from my own experiences and just try to offer some sort of perspective. So the point that I'm getting at is that the first thing you should do is identify that you're heading into that direction, because a lot of the time you don't wake up and then boom, you're just depressed. The truth is, it builds up over time. And depending on your situation, it can build a lot quicker, it can build a lot slower. I'm not one of those people that's gonna sit here and tell you that things like anxiety and depression don't exist. I suffer from it myself, and I constantly fight. So the best thing you can do is identify where it's stemming from and when it's starting to happen. Always get it at the start if you can. Now, if you can't and you end up in that depressive slump, your mind is gonna get real, real dark. You're going to think of some things, and, what you think of and what, you know, what goes on in your head, I can't tell you a specific solution for, because I'm not you. You know what I'm saying? I can tell you what I do. And what I do is I let myself feel these things out. I don't take any drastic action. Okay? That's the big thing. Don't take drastic action. All right? A lot of times you're going to do a lot of permanent damage to yourself for things that are truly temporary. And that's the big thing. You got to remember that it's temporary. Like I said, this comes in cycles, because as long as you're in that depressive state, and even though it might seem like it's forever, in the grand scheme of things, it doesn't last as long as you think. And for some people, it might last a lot longer. Like I said, I can't speak for another person specifically, but I can talk for myself. And for me, when I look at the grand scheme of things, I could be having a great year and have a bad month, but I still had a great year. You know what I'm saying? Or even a good year, or even a solid year. It doesn't even have to be great, but it has to be better than the low point that I was in. And for me, I think that you being whoever is out there listening to this, should be able to identify that a little bit better. Because when you can identify that better, you can take small wins even in your losses. When you're at the lowest point, and your brain is really going into them dark places, if you can get even the smallest wins, the smallest, and I mean the absolutely most abysmal tiny wins, you'll still come out on top. And if you can manage to do that more effectively, you'll actively fight back your depression. You'll beat it back, and you'll get to the point where now you're not just sitting in bed wearing nothing but work clothes and pajamas. You're not going 2-3 days without showering and not brushing your teeth. You're not sitting up letting your home, your living space, your comfort area get all cluttered and messy, and thus having that affect your brain. Look, it gets hard. None of this is easy, okay? I think life is just the hardest thing. I don't know what else to really compare it to, because, life is the ultimate thing for us. But when you do it every single day, it gets easier. But doing it every day is the hard part. You're going to hear me say that quote a lot. I love that quote. I love that quote to death, because a lot of the things that we do are very tedious and small and repetitive. And what I've learned is that what breaks us are not the big things that happen, but it's all the little small things that build up to that big thing. When that big thing happens, you have something to identify it, right? And it might be something monumental, and it might devastate you in a certain way, but it won't do anywhere near as much damage to you as all the little things that you ignored along the way. It acts like a snowball. It goes down a big old hill, and it rolls down until it's this giant, colossal culmination of all the things that you consider a failure and being worthless and all these things. So you gotta have those tiny wins to battle them back. And that's all I can really offer you is in terms of perspective. And I do hope that this reaches you in some sort of way or resonates with you. And if it did and you made it this far, I appreciate you. If it didn't, I don't really know how to help you. But I will sit here and hope that you do continue to battle, because the war ain't over.